Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. It's the 9th episode of Top PM Voices. Our topic today is Unlocking Product Potential, 4 Keys for Evidence-Guided Development with the legendary Itamar Gilad. Before we start introducing him and into the topic, let's give a couple seconds until more people to join in. And meanwhile, please drop a message where you are joining from and how is the weather there in the public chat. I'm Ala. I'm a junior marketing manager here at Airfocus, and I'm joining from Istanbul. It's 30 degrees here. It's super sunny. I'm hoping it's as sunny as it is here where you are. So let's see where people are joining. Oh, another one from Barcelona. Hi, Julie. Welcome. Welcome, Stuart and Ronya. Yes, it's great to see more people are in. So a little walkover of the tour. You also already found the audience chat. If you have any questions during the presentation, please drop your questions there. I have my colleague Nuran in the backstage who is helping me to moderate the event. She will collect all the questions and then we will ask all your questions to Itamar at the end of the presentation in the Q&A part. And yes, I think we can slowly get started. I would like to introduce our speaker today, Itamar Gilad. Itamar is a seasoned product management expert with over 2 decades of experience. He has held senior roles at industry giants like Google and Microsoft, where he worked on products that have impacted millions of users worldwide. Itamar is also the creator of the GIST framework and the confidence meter, tools that have revolutionized how we approach product management today. He is a coach, author, and speaker who is passionate about helping teams make better and evidence-guided decisions. And recently, he launched his new book, Evidence Guided: Creating High-Impact Products in the Face of Uncertainty, which introduces actionable models to drive change and create products that truly matter. I'm sure you will talk about it, Itamar. And today he will be sharing insights on how to use confidence meter to overcome biases and make data-informed decisions. We'll learn how this tool can help us quantify the potential impact of our ideas and bring a scientific approach to our product management processes. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Itamar. Welcome again. How are you today?
Thank you. Very well. Very happy to be here. Thank you, Ala, for this generous introduction and for the invitation. Happy to meet you guys. And yeah, let's get started.
Then I would like to ask a question to our audience, actually. And this is not a poll question this time. If you would drop your answers in the chat, I would be really happy. I would like to know, how often do you rely on evidence-based metrics to make product decisions? Or are you familiar with this evidence-guided development processes? Any thoughts, anyone? Okay, I see. Okay, not often, weekly, monthly. So for those who are on the same side with Roman and Rick, who is saying not often enough, I'm sure Itamar will change your minds today. So, and maybe monthly is not enough also. So without further ado, I will leave the stage to you, Itamar, and enjoy the talk.
Thank you very much. I hope you guys are able to see my slides. So yeah, evidence-guided development, and also much of this is covered in my book that I'm promoting here shamelessly. But let's look at first what's the problem, what we're trying to solve. So most of the companies I work with are doing some version of this. They spend an awful lot of time upfront trying to plan. And it's kind of multi-level, trickling down planning that I call the planning waterfall, where we start with a strategy, which is kind of a long-term plan. Often it's just a roadmap on steroids. Then we turn it into a yearly or quarterly or 6-monthly roadmap. We spend more time planning that. Then we turn those into projects with backlogs and features. And then we move to execution. Finally, development is agile. Everything is completely agile. We can change our mind every other week, but we can't really because the planning is already set. We already decided what we want to launch. It's already burnt into the roadmap. So do we get the benefits of agile really? But all of this is fine if our plans are actually good. If we're good planners, none of this matters. It's a good system. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And it's pretty easy to see just by looking at last year's roadmap. First, we're very bad at predicting our ability to deliver stuff, and we under-deliver or take too long, or sometimes all of a sudden something pops out of nowhere and changes the roadmap. And second, the roadmaps, although we spend a lot of time delivering them, although we launch all these features eventually, we don't see any marked improvement, not in user statistics, user value, not in business value. Mostly we keep on with the same trend and things don't change. And if you look deeper, you'll find that most of the value actually comes from old products that we launched years ago and that found product market fit a long time ago. So there's a suspicion here that we're not creating enough impact, although we're spending a lot of effort. So what's going on here? What's the problem? I would argue that the challenge of defining, let's say we're looking at 30 ideas and deciding which one of those are the best, which are the ones that we need to bake into the roadmap, is a very, very hard challenge for us. It's a very complex problem. It has a lot of moving parts to do with the product, the technology, the needs of the users, the market, internal friction within our company. These are things that are hard to predict. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of ambiguity. Things often are not as they seem. We often have either too much or too little information, and both of these are hard for us to deal with. Still, we need to decide under time pressure. We need to produce the roadmap or the strategy or the project on a set schedule. If you consult with psychologists, they will tell you that these conditions exactly are very, very hard on the main tool we use to make these decisions. And this is it, our brains, our judgment, our experience, our intuition. These are the main tools we use. We use opinions, we use consensus, we use some politics sometimes. And our brains, when they are confronted with overwhelming amount of data that is not structured, is not clear, ambiguous and complex, they tend to oversimplify the problem. They tend to make us fall in love with certain ideas and hate other ideas. And we think it's very scientific, we think it's very high value decisions, but often the result is not, as we saw before. We're launching a lot of things that are basically waste. So how do we change this? So there is some good news, and the good news is that over the past decade or so, we developed very powerful tools to start doing research. So we have user research techniques and ability to observe and interview our customers in different ways. We have also quantitative methods for data analysis and data science that enabled us to get this sort of data. And we can do market research now with the internet at our fingertips. It's very easy for us to learn a lot of things very quickly. So that means we have a lot of data available to us if we're looking for. But even more important, we can distill this data into evidence. What's the difference? Data is just facts and figures, but they don't necessarily tell any story. Evidence is data that either supports or refutes our assumptions of the world. And those are the assumptions that eventually are baked into the roadmap or into the strategy or into whatever we decide to put into the product. So it's very useful to have evidence to kind of force us out of our brains, out of our heads, and confront reality. And we know from science, from medicine, from law, that a combination of human judgment plus evidence is very powerful. If you go to a doctor, that doctor will not just look at you and prescribe a treatment. That doctor will first ask you to do a lab examination or analysis, might check your blood pressure, do a set of other examinations, and based on the data, based on the evidence, will decide what to do in combination with his or her judgment. And that's exactly what we want to do as well in product development. So let's look how this might work. What we need is a sort of framework that enables us to become a bit more evidence-guided. And there are multiple ones. I didn't invent this concept at all. It exists at least 30 years looking back, and probably more. And there are different frameworks to choose from. I created my own based on my experiences in various companies, and especially Google, and based on my experience working with many product teams since. And it's called GIST: Goals, Ideas, Steps, and Tasks. Very briefly, goals are about what we're trying to achieve, where do we want to end up, what are the changes we want to create, how do we measure progress towards them. If you're using OKRs, if you're using metrics, that's where they belong, in the goals layer. Ideas are hypothetical ways to achieve the goals. We can launch this feature or another feature, we can partner, we can acquire the software, we can do a whole bunch of things that potentially will lead us towards the goal. But the key point here is those are hypotheticals. Many ideas actually don't work. So we need to test multiple ones and actually go with the ones that the evidence shows that are good. And that's where steps come in. Steps are small projects or activities that help us build an idea and test it at the same time. Create, build, measure, learn loops. So that's what the industry sometimes calls experiments. I prefer to call them steps. And finally, there's the task layer, which is where most of our attention is as a development team. And that's what we manage in Kanban boards and in Jira. Those are the day-to-day activities, the tickets, etc. Very important things. Nothing will get done unless we manage those. We don't want to change this layer, but we do want to connect the work to the steps, to the ideas, and ultimately to the goals. So the team is working in that direction. The team is optimizing for business value and user value, and not just for delivery and output. So with that in mind, I want to focus on the two middle layers, the ideas and steps layer, where we actually implement what's called product discovery. Let me explain. So we need to realize that ideas come from everywhere and all the time. We can get ideas from outside, from customers or from research. There are multiple forms of research: user research, technology research, market research, business research, competitive research. And they can also come from inside, from either a stakeholder might give you an idea, a manager, the team. We can do design sprints or hackathons. All of these are good sources of ideas. And now we have yet another one. We can ask a ChatGPT or a Gemini or one of those, and they will give us yet more ideas. So having too many ideas, it's not a problem. It's good to have multiple options, but then we need to choose somehow between these ideas. And another thing we need to realize is that most of these ideas are actually not going to be good. We know this from statistics of A/B experiments and research conducted across many, many companies by people like Ronnie Kochavi, who is a very famous data scientist. And the numbers speak for themselves. Even the best companies, even the companies that are very well equipped to test and to do research, usually get no more than 33% success rate. So two-thirds of the ideas do nothing or actually create negative results. And the statistics, the average is even lower often. You might say that some of this failure is due to the experiments themselves failing, so maybe it's 1 in 2. That's the best case scenario that I ever heard of, and that's what you should expect. So potentially 50% of what's currently in your roadmap or in your backlog are things you shouldn't be building. So that's a pretty sad statistic we don't talk a lot about, but it's very important. How do we deal with that? I think science can give us a clue. And this is Linus Pauling. He used to be a very, very famous biochemist, one of the people who helped discover the structure of the DNA. And he had this to say: if you want to have good ideas, you must have many ideas. Most of them you will be wrong, and what you have to learn is which ones to throw away. So scientists knew this statistics too for a long time, and they are just saying, try out more ideas and test them, and just focus on the ideas that yield positive evidence. Here's how we can bring this to our development cycle. So we start with the goals. I skipped over this layer, but there's a whole set of techniques we can use in order to distill what are the 3 things that we really need to nail this quarter or this year, and make them measurable. We generate ideas or collect ideas, and they keep coming. And then we do 2 activities. The first activity is evaluating these ideas very quickly and very objectively. So we don't want to spend a lot of time in debate. We want a system that is very, very quick in just assessing ideas, and I'll show it to you. I'll introduce ICE, which many of you already are familiar with. And the immediate result is that most of these ideas we can park. Just the initial evaluation will show us that they're not super strong. And that's good, because then we can take more ideas in and evaluate them. The ones that do show promise, we want to take into the second phase, which is implemented by the steps layer of GIST, which is validation. Validation is putting the idea to the test, or more specifically, putting the assumptions embedded in the idea to the test in various forms. And we will talk about that as well. And of course, running this validation generates evidence. And the evidence can feed back, and we can reevaluate the ideas very quickly in light of the new evidence. And for most ideas, it will show that they're actually not as strong as we thought, and then we can park them. But for those that still show promise, we can take them to the next validation step and the next. And in the process, we're kind of building them up to a point where we feel we're confident enough about this idea. The key assumptions have been met and proven, and we can switch to the third level, which is delivery. And from here on, we're just building the product as fast and as efficiently as we can and launching it. And I would say you will launch a lot less, far fewer ideas than the ones you're actually taking in, but those are much more likely to be the good ones. And even if they were good at the beginning, even good ideas need iteration and need improvement. So through this process of discovery, you will also improve the good ideas and make them even better. So that's basically what we want to do in theory. But how does it look in practice? So let's give it a go. I'll give you a real-world example, and let's see how it might work. So in this example, you are the product manager. Assume that that's the situation. And the product you're working on is a customer relationship management for small businesses. So small business owners, they need to support and stay in touch with their customers. And we're building some sort of platform that enables them to be in constant communication, supporting them, answering their questions, sending invoices, all this other stuff. And we know from our research that these people are very busy and very kind of pressed for time. And we are hoping that our system will be better for them than WhatsApp or email or whatever system they're using otherwise. The goal that we're focusing on is reducing churn. We are able to acquire a lot of customers, but we're also losing a lot of them. So we have churn that is too high. And one of the observations we notice is that, again, they're too busy and they get too many messages and they miss some good ones. So maybe if we can alleviate some of the pain using a chatbot, right? This is the obvious idea right now. Everything is about chatbot. Everything is about machine learning. So why don't we build a chatbot to help the business owners? Sounds like a good idea, right? Shall we just go ahead and build it? Let's hold on for a second. Let's start the analysis part. Let's evaluate the idea. And here I'm using ICE, impact, confidence, and ease. Let's start with 2 of the 3 elements. Impact tries to assess on a scale of 0 to 10, how impactful is this idea going to be on the target metric? In this case, customer churn. So if we're launching a successful version of the chatbot, how much are we going to reduce churn? And imagine that 0 is we're not going to change anything. And 10 is like the maximum change we can ever imagine for one feature or one product change. So our gut instinct after discussing this briefly is that this is a game changer. This is going to do a lot for a lot of customers. They are going to love it. It's a 9 out of 10. And by the way, I see product teams being very generous with impact assessments when they do this, although a true 9 is very, very rare. It's very uncommon that you actually stumble on one of these ideas. And when they launch, you feel it very strongly, but we tend to associate, to give ourselves this benefit of the doubt. All right, at this stage of the guesswork, it's legitimate. How easy or hard is it going to be to launch? Imagine a scale where 10 is the easiest thing you can imagine. Maybe it's a couple of weeks, you build the whole thing. Let's put aside testing, experimentation, just from start to zero, production ready, how long will it take? If the answer is 2 weeks, maybe that's a 10 on my scale. If the answer is, let's say, 25 person weeks, that's not easy. Maybe on my scale, it will be a 2. But that's the velocity of my team and my abilities. You need to create your own scale. So in this case, this team feels that this is not the most easy product they ever worked on. It's not extremely hard, but because, ChatGPT has OpenAI have good APIs and there's other options. So we think we can run this in a reasonable time, but it is a new experience for us. There are risks there. So they estimate 3 out of 10 in terms of ease. Already, just by having this discussion and just by putting numbers on these 2 questions, what's the impact, what the ease, we are starting to have a more structured discussion instead of just, let's go, it's a great idea. And sometimes even at this level, it's enough for us to learn something that we didn't consider earlier. However, there's a problem. We're pretty bad at actually guessing both of these numbers. And there's a lot of evidence that we are actually overestimating for ideas we like and underestimating for ideas we don't like. And we tend to be also overly optimistic about the time it will take, and things tend to take much longer than we estimate. So how do we compensate for this? That's the third element of ICE, and that's, in my mind, is the most brilliant part of the system, which, of course, I didn't invent. ICE was invented long before me, and that's trying to answer the question, how sure are we about our impact and ease assessment? Those are guesses, right? We don't know for sure. We will not know until we launch the product. So how sure are we that it's actually a 9 and a 3 and not a 4 and a 5? And the scientific answer here is, let's look at the evidence. That's what a scientist would say. What evidence do you have in support of these assumptions? And that's a really good way to go about it, and asking yourself, what evidence do we have and how important it is? But I found it a bit hard because there wasn't really any scale or any explanation what is considered strong evidence, what is considered weak evidence. If the CEO is really excited about this idea, is it strong? If 3 customers ask for it, is this a strong idea? If we tested it in a survey, how strong is that? So eventually I created a scale, and this is this colorful thing called the confidence meter. It's probably the thing I'm most known for. I'm not very well known, but this thing is my biggest success in this sense. And basically think about it like a thermometer. It goes from very low confidence, which is this dark blue area in the upper right, all the way up to the red area, which is full confidence. And you can see the numbers going from 0 to 10 accordingly. And there are generally 4 areas. The upper right quadrant, the dark blue area, the near zero confidence, is all about opinions. It could be your own self-conviction. You think it's a great idea. You're smart, you're an experienced person. You might think this is good enough. But according to this tool, the opinion of one person who is not the target audience equates to 0.01 out of 10. Why is that? Because behind every terrible idea that ever existed, someone thought it was good. That's really not evidence. That's just self-conviction. And it's the same if you created a pitch deck, and it's the same if you connected the idea to some greater theme out there, like generative machine learning or the blockchain or mixed reality, augmented reality, or the strategy of the company. Just the fact that this idea aligns with these things doesn't make it strong. A lot of bad ideas are being implemented right now just based on these themes. So we need to be very cautious, and this whole category gives us a maximum of 0.1 out of 10 confidence. The second category, which is this dark light blue area at the bottom, is about evaluating the idea in various ways. One common way is to review it with your colleagues and your managers and your stakeholders, and they will give you more opinions, because usually they are not the target audience, but they might find flaws in the idea you didn't consider. So this is a harder test to pass. On the other side, groups are not necessarily any better at evaluating ideas than individuals. And sometimes there are all sorts of group biases like groupthink or politics that may influence these decisions. So we're not giving this sort of evidence very high score either, even if everyone in your company loves the idea. Estimates and plans are about taking the idea and trying on paper to see if it works. You can do a little back of the envelope calculation to see how many customers might convert and use it. You can do a business model canvas. There's all sorts of models you can use to estimate an idea. And that's even slightly harder to succeed in. Some ideas actually die just there on paper, but it's still not very strong. It's just fancy guesswork. So this whole category gives us a maximum of 0.5 out of 10. Then we move into data. We're starting to collect data, and data can come from our logs, from user usage logging, from interviewing customers, from observing the market and the competitors. And there's two forms of data. There's what I call anecdotal evidence, which is just a few data points. So maybe 3 customers ask for this feature, or maybe 1 competitor has it. By the way, in many companies, if you think that it's a good idea, so you have the opinions part covered, and the leading competitor has this feature, the validation is done. This idea is certainly a good idea, let's go and launch it. How often does this succeed? Almost never, because that competitor may not necessarily have a crystal ball either, and they may have launched a bad idea, and we don't know it. So it's really risky to trust anecdotal evidence. It might be just a pattern in the noise, but we don't see it. Market data is about collecting more data points and creating a much more stronger set of evidence, but we haven't tested the idea yet. It's just available data that kind of supports what we believe in. To really go into medium and high confidence, we need to start testing the idea, which means building versions of it. It could be just prototypes, it could be just mock-ups, it could be completely fake, a concierge test. There's all sorts of ways to validate ideas. I'll show you a list in a second. Putting them in front of customers and measuring the results and measuring whether or not they will do or behave in the way that complies with our assumptions. And that is the hardest test really for any idea. And there are certainly harder and harder tests to go through. So we can go up the chain up to a point where we feel we have high confidence or sufficiently high confidence. Note, you don't need to take every idea throughout this whole thing. You don't need to take every idea to high confidence. You don't need to do a lot of it. In some ideas, expert opinion is enough. You're trying to do some redesign of the settings page, changing the fonts, changing the order of the settings. The opinion of the designer may be enough. You don't have to test it necessarily in a very thorough idea. If an idea is small, but a little bit risky, you might want to build it, test it in a high confidence test, like an A/B experiment, and then launch it. If an idea is big and risky, you want to take your time and start very small and then move forward. So this is the tool. Let's try to use it with our current case. So the chatbot, what kind of evidence do we have? I'll just go through the categories and ask myself, do I have this or not? So self-conviction, yeah, I'm convinced as the originator of the idea that this is a good idea, 0.01 out of 10. Pitch deck, yeah, I created it, it's shiny, it's convincing, 0.03. Thematic support, oh my God, chatbots are all the rage right now, 0.05. Others' opinions, everyone in my company loves it, 0.2. Estimates and plan, I haven't done yet, so I cannot give myself a boost here, so no. And yeah, one competitor has a similar chatbot, so that's anecdotal evidence down here at the bottom somewhere. So yeah, I can give myself that. You can stop here and just take the highest number, which is 0.5, which is what a lot of teams do, or you can sum up the number, which will give you 0.79. So if we go back to our ICE analysis overall, now we have the three numbers. We have impact, which is still 9. We estimate it's a 9. We have ease, that is 3. And we have confidence, which is 0.8, which says, yeah, we might think that these are the numbers, but we have very, very little evidence to go by. Basically, our strongest evidence is that someone else launched the same feature. Is this enough to decide that this idea is good and go all in on development now, on delivery, without validating it? I would strongly recommend against it, because there could be so many assumptions that are wrong, and we will not know them until we launch it to 100% of our customers. So let's try to validate. Let's run some steps. First off, it's important to understand that there's a whole gamut of ways to validate ideas. I like to break them into 5 buckets with acronym AFTER: assessment, fact-finding, tests, experiments, and release results. Assessment is just doing quick things that are just looking at the idea, like I-scoring that we just saw. Fact-finding is about starting to dig for data that we already have. We don't have to generate it necessarily always. Tests are about putting it into the test, and we have early tests, which are more about faking the idea and testing, then mid-level tests, which are about creating a very rough version of the idea and putting it in front of users, and late tests, which are much more complete and much richer and late in the game. And we have also experiments. Experiments are tests that have a control element. So these are actually split tests. So A/B experiments, multivariate experiments, etc. And even the launch itself, you can do a gradual launch, do mega kind of A/B experiments, and use the launch itself as an experiment. So we have this whole gamut, and the trick is to start from the left side and not to go and invest in the expensive things, not wait until you have a very elaborate MVP before you put it in front of customers. That's way too late. You are already too invested in this idea. The trick is to start early. So let's see how this team is doing this. How well are they mastering this technique? So the team started with a very simple assessment technique, just ICE analysis. We just saw the 3 numbers, and that's a very good way to start. And as I said, if you do this across multiple ideas, because we will have more, immediately you see some patterns where some ideas, even on the basis of ICE analysis, are not worth pursuing right now. We're willing to park them in favor of ones that look much more promising. And that's in itself is a big help. But what can we do next? Now that we know that we are interested in this idea, but we want to build a little bit more confidence. So a pretty obvious choice in this case is to do a usability test. And I want to combine it with yet another technique that's very common, by the way, which is called Wizard of Oz. So let's see how this works. So we invite into our lab or into an online user testing environment 12 active customers. We interview them first to understand about the problems and whether or not they have the problem we're trying to solve. And then we show them a working version of the chatbot, which is kind of surprising. Where did this come from? We didn't even start coding this thing. How do we have a working version? Well, of course, it's just a prototype. And behind the scenes, there's a teammate that is simulating the chatbot. Top tip, if you want an intelligent chatbot, pick an intelligent teammate. And that gives the participants a feeling as if the chatbot is actually working and they can get a real sense of it. And that generates very interesting results because first off, we realize that there's a lot of excitement towards the concept. When they understand that we're offering them a chatbot, everyone loves the concept. But in using it, a lot of them struggle with it because the usability is not very easy for them. They don't know how to train the chatbot. They don't know how to do the hands-off. So with the prototype, we see quite a lot of usability challenges. Plus, some of these customers are telling us about edge cases we didn't consider. Like they say, you know, all of my customers I know personally, and they expect a personal touch when I talk with them. So I'm worried that putting a chatbot in the middle might offend them a little bit. Or some of my customers ask what on today's menu, but I change it all the time throughout the day. So how do I get the chatbot to know what's actually available and what's not? And those are things we didn't know. And that's always the case when you talk to customers. You always stumble on things you didn't know, and it change your thinking. So what happens after that? We started from this. We thought that the idea was a 9, and we thought that the ease of implementing is 3. But after analyzing the data and the evidence, we came to the conclusion that it's actually not as optimistic as we thought. Only a subset of our users will benefit from this. Only the users that are more tech savvy, only the users that are able to use the chatbot and that the chatbot actually fits in their environment. And it's because of all these edge cases and because we need to work on usability more than we thought, the ease goes down to a 2. So we changed the impact from 9 to 4 and the ease from 3 to 2. But now we have more confidence about these numbers because a usability test is kind of a mid-level test, and it gives us a boost of 2.0 in our confidence. Now we have something to discuss. Should we continue with this idea? Should we change it in a big way? Should we park it and switch to another idea? In this case, the team still thinks there's a lot of potential here, and even if it's a 4, for these customers, it will be very impactful. These are probably the power users, so getting them not to churn may be very beneficial for the company. So we want to explore this idea further. However, we don't have enough confidence to just stop and switch to discovery just yet, because the confidence level is still just 2.8 out of 10. So a lot of things can go wrong, which we didn't catch in this usability test. So what do we do next? We look at the after model, and we pick something that will test other assumptions. And for that, we're going to use a technique that I got to know while I worked at Google called a longitudinal user study. It's a very fancy name, but what it really means is that we're picking through some sort of survey or something, 200 customers that are willing to test the early version of this product. So we build a version that is not complete. It only supports the core scenarios. It's not fully polished. Maybe there are some minor bugs, but it gives the core value that we believe the customers are after. And we recruit 200 typical customers, and we offer them to start using it. And we're giving them the tools. They can use it for 2 weeks unattended, but we are monitoring their usage. And what we see is very interesting. We expected this 40% of them to actually love it and to use it, but actually the number is higher. A higher portion of customers actually engage with this chatbot on a daily basis. We also send them surveys 4 times throughout this 2 weeks to ask them how do they like it. And we see that with this group, they actually like it more and more, the more they use it. But we did lose about half of our customers throughout the test. So half of the customers stopped using, but the other half are pretty happy with it. So that's actually good news. That shows that this feature is applicable and is usable. And actually the customers build workflows around it for some of our users. And those are the most important users for us indeed. So we started here. This was the assessment from last time. But now, based on these results, we can increment the impact to a 5 because we understand now that it's more impactful than we thought in the usability test. And also the ease improved from a 2 to a 4. Why is this? Because we already built this core version, and now the jump to a fully built version is smaller. So the ease improved. And now we have moderate, medium, high confidence, 5.8, that the chatbot is a good idea. So unless we see any other risks that we didn't test, this might be good enough to stop the validation at this point and switch into delivery. And that's possibly what I would recommend to this team at this point. We don't need to deliberate the point too much. We don't need to force it. We just need to test until the point where it's good enough and then move on. There's always some risk left, but we should take it. Some people ask me, what about delivery time and launches and the roadmap? Isn't this very slow? First off, it's not slow, it's faster because we are actually letting go of a lot of bad ideas much sooner. Most ideas don't need to be validated even to this level before we realize they're not strong. And that means that we can free resources to work on the good ideas and double down on them. And often we can even launch these ideas sooner because we realize a smaller thing than we thought initially serves the point. So this is actually a much more efficient and a much faster way to create value. If you're optimizing for putting code into production, yeah, maybe the old way, the old system that is all about output is the right way for you. But if you actually care about time to outcomes, I think this is a better system. What about the roadmap? I think we should consider a different type of roadmap called an outcomes roadmap. Again, not a concept I invented. This is just my illustration of it. An outcomes roadmap puts on a timeline the actual outcomes we're trying to achieve, for example, reducing churn or enhancing security and privacy, with a target date. But being honest about what this entails means that sometimes we need to start with research because we don't understand the problem enough. We don't understand the users. So we may do user research initially, or data research, or market research, whatever it requires, technology. We can time limit it and say within 3 weeks we expect to finish. The result of this research is that we will come up with ideas and we will identify opportunities or problems, and those can feed into product discovery. Product discovery is about validating the ideas. That's actually what I showed you just now. This was the product discovery phase. And then this will trickle into product delivery. Once we have an idea that is sufficiently validated, like you can see on this example on the right, these ideas we can already plan and we can commit to them. We can say that we're going to build this and the ETA is X, and that's just like a classic roadmap. With the exception that now we have high confidence or medium confidence that these ideas are actually going to work, as opposed to a classic roadmap. And finally, even when we launch these ideas, the change we expect, the outcome will not happen instantaneously. So sometimes we need to factor in for effect delay. But during this time, the team can switch over to other things, of course. So yeah, not a classic roadmap, but definitely something that I would recommend considering, because maybe it's right for you. I would argue that if you use a system like this, it also helps close a very important gap that exists in many companies, which is the gap between managers or planners or executive stakeholders and the team. Today, they're kind of segregated in their own worlds. They're thinking about roadmaps on one hand and user stories and backlogs and stuff on the other hand, and they don't trust each other so much. And product managers are supposed to close this gap. But I would say that if you use this language of ideas and steps in the middle, and you use product discovery and you share the evidence you find with your colleagues, with your managers, with your team, things will become much clearer for everyone, and you will be able to build trust, because the managers will see how the team is systematically and somewhat scientifically striving towards the business goals. And that's a very, very important thing, because without trust, it's really hard to get empowerment. It's really hard to do proper product discovery. That's my experience. So the best companies are ones where the teams are trusted to act, are empowered. But in many companies, that's not the case, unfortunately. If any of this sounds remotely interesting for you, I have a few resources for you. There's the book, which I'm promoting shamelessly here. You just go to evidenceguided.com. It's available on Amazon and other platforms. And there's also free resources. So if you just want the confidence meter as a spreadsheet, or you want the after model as an ebook, or you want a template of the outcome roadmap, all of these are available for download from my site. Just go to itamargilad.com/resources. And with that, I'll hand it off to your questions, if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Itamar, for sharing all these insights with us. I am a big fan of the confidence meter. I feel like the stones in my head are now just sitting right in their places. And that's also the comments that we get from our audience meanwhile when you were doing the presentation. So thank you for sharing all these with us. Yes, we have a couple of questions. I think Nuran will bring them on the stage. Yes, the first one actually comes from me. This question is related with the lower steps of the GIST framework, where we talked about the evolution goes to validation and then delivery. I'm wondering, like, who should be involved in this process?
I think anyone who can contribute to it. Usually it's the PM, one or more engineers, if it's a step that actually involves developing code, but sometimes you can use engineers also for other things. A designer, a user researcher, a data analyst, a marketing person, whatever the nature of the step is, we need to build what I call a step force around it, a small group of people who are all committed to the success of the step, which means not just each one doing their little part and forgetting about it, but actually getting the step to run, to collect the data and analyze it. And we're working like in startup mode. We're all helping each other. We're all collaborating. There's no detailed specs that someone is giving someone else. And that's a much more rewarding sort of work. So yeah, whoever needs to work on it, please join.
Thank you so much for your answer. That makes so much sense. And the second question comes from Ronja. How do you incorporate risk into decision making? I would assume that low risk, low effort ideas might not need a high confidence. What is your view?
Excuse me. Yeah, that's correct. So basically, when we talk about confidence, it's kind of the flip of risk. What is risk? Risk is the unknowns, the things that might trip us and we don't know about. When we first evaluate an idea, we try to think also, what are the hidden assumptions? What must be true for the idea to be successful? Or the flip side of this, what are the risks that if they are true, the idea will fail? And you're probably familiar with Kagan's, Marty Kagan's, the very famous product thinker, where he listed 4 types of risks. There's value risk, whether or not there's a demand and a need for this. There's feasibility risk, whether or not we can build it. Usability risk, whether or not it will be usable and fit in customers' lives. And then there's viability risk, whether or not it will make business sense or it will not conflict with our existing products. So that's a very useful framework to look at. As I said, small changes that are out of the main line usually are not very risky, and you can kind of test them very quickly or not test them at all or test them with other changes. But ideas that are small can sometimes be risky. I've seen cases where a small UI change in the login interface caused a massive drop-off in revenue because a lot of customers failed to log in and failed to acquire. So when you see this and you sense there's a risk there, even if you're not sure, it's well worth testing much further. So risk is embedded in this system. Absolutely. It's designed to eliminate risk.
Thank you, Itamar. I hope that answers your question. And the third question comes from Nuran. And she's asking, how do you recommend balancing the use of the confidence meter with the need for creativity and innovation in product development?
I think they support each other. I don't think there's any conflict at all. Creativity and innovation is like, how do we come up with ideas? How do we decide what's important, what's not? And that's separate from the confidence meter. We can generate ideas through design sprints, we can generate through research, we can generate through hackathon. I recommend using all of those, and I highly support them. The only place where we use the confidence meter is when we need to assess which ideas to test first, and when we test them, when we need to evaluate what does the evidence mean, is it strong enough to validate this idea or not? And that's really where you should be using it, not to in any way prevent people from coming up with ideas. And if anything, I think by allowing more ideas into the funnel, instead of just, when you do the roadmap, there's like a battle of opinions, and eventually the hippo decides these 3 ideas are the best. But with this system, it's much more democratic. We allow a lot more ideas into the funnel. And so it's a little bit more creative in my mind. So absolutely, I don't see a conflict, and I think you can be super creative using this method.
Thank you so much. And the next question comes from Gautam. She's asking, is there a single number from ICE that can be used as metric for go, no go?
I would say it's not ICE entirely, it's the confidence meter. I wrote an entire article that maybe someone wants to look it up right now, called How Much Validation is Enough, or How Much Discovery is Enough. And in it, I give kind of guidelines of how much, what level in the confidence meter you need to reach in order to say this type of idea, is it good enough? Or that type of idea. I try to give, exactly, you have it in the chat right now, thank you. And try to look at that as a guideline.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Nuran, for sharing the resource with us. The next question comes from Catalina. Is there a good framework to come up with the assumptions we want to test?
Absolutely. A guy named David J. Bland, a very smart guy, created a tool called assumption mapping. Again, if you want to look it up, it's there's a lot of resources about it on the internet. It basically looks at an idea on two axes. One is the uncertainty axis, how much uncertainty is there? How much do we know or don't know about it? And the other is the importance. And we basically create assumptions, and we map them, whether or not we know the answer, whether or not this assumption is important or not. And it's a kind of a team brainstorm activity. I recommend inviting people from outside the team. So in case we have some blind spots, someone from the outside sometimes helps us with that. And you just put the stickies on this two-dimensional map, and it really shines a light of where you need to start, which assumptions are the most risky for you.
Thank you, Itamar. We have one more question that was asked in the very beginning of the presentation, where we were also talking about this evaluation to validation to delivery. It was from Rick, and he asked, curious where jobs to be done fits, if at all, within the GIST.
Absolutely. I would put it in the research part. Jobs to be done, if you're not familiar with it, is a very useful framework to kind of map out the needs of the customer. What jobs do they have, which are, think of the product as something that they hire in order to satisfy a job. They need to get from point A to point B. They need to eat something satisfying along the way. So those are all jobs. But those jobs might run into friction or are underserved or better served. So all of this can come from user research often, or from data analysis, or from other sources, and you map out what are the jobs this customer has. By the way, there's different variations of what jobs to be done is. There's a little bit of debate. So you have one version as another one as well. I think it's very important, but GIST is not covering this kind of exploratory research. Another very useful tool is OST, Opportunity Solution Trees by Teresa Torres. That also is a good tool to map out user needs. So please use those things and use them as filters into which types of ideas you want to challenge. If you find a very important job, filter ideas that are not attracting this job and just come up with ideas that you think will deliver on the job.
And with this, we get to end of this session with all the questions answered. This was a webinar we had with Tony Ulvik, and he also explained his version of jobs to be done, and it was one of our best webinars so far, so I highly recommend for our audience to watch it. And thank you for all your participations, and thank you so much, Itamar, for being here today. And I would like to, before we give the mic to you for the ending words, I would like to invite you for our upcoming webinar, which is going to be with Craig Unsworth. It's going to be about storytelling drives product success, the 9-grid comms model for product leaders, in 2 weeks. So thank you so much again. Is there anything that you would like to say, Itamar, before we jump off?
No, thank you very much. Please feel free to try the resources I shared, and please reach out to me. I'm available through my website. If you have any insights or any feedback, I learn a lot from your input. So please, I'm available to you.
I will make sure I will add all these resources and the link to the recording and also a link to your LinkedIn in the follow-up email. And I am hoping to see you all in 2 weeks for the next one. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.